from the CUBE studios in Palo Alto and Boston, bringing you data-driven insights from the CUBE and ETR. This is Breaking Analysis with Dave Vellante.
A war of words is raging between Marc Benioff and Satya Nadella. One dismissing Microsoft's AI offerings as Clippy 2.0, and the other predicting the end of SaaS applications as we know them in favor of agent-based technology. Now, the work that we've done here at theCUBE Research indicates that while each leader trolls the other, both are touching on a deeper truth, that enterprise applications are undergoing a profound transformation. In our view, linear value chains, which once defined how organizations managed themselves, are giving way to fully orchestrated platforms that treat data not merely as an asset, but as the foundation for flexible and dynamic processes. Previously fossilized in code, these processes will now be able to be harnessed and reconfigured to create digital twins of an organization. We believe this evolution will be powered by, among other innovations, knowledge graphs that render processes as malleable building blocks that are fungible and capable of redefining operational structures. In our opinion, this convergence of AI agents, knowledge graphs, and digital twins represents a new era where companies can transcend the limitations of legacy architectures and embark on a forward-thinking path toward more adaptive, intelligent, and efficient ways of working. Hello and welcome to this week's theCUBE Research Insights, powered by ETR. In this breaking analysis, CUBE Research Principal Analyst George Gilbert and I will try to squint through the noise and paint a picture of what the future of enterprise software and agentic AI will look like. And we'll do so by juxtaposing the approaches being pursued by two industry titans who are sniping at each other in the public domain, namely Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, and Marc Benioff from Salesforce. George, good to see you. Welcome.
Likewise, good to see you, Dave.
Yeah, so we have this war of words from these two software titans, and so on TV and podcasts and public statements. Benioff and Nadella, they've been trolling each other, and Benioff really started it by insulting Microsoft co-pilots, calling them Clippy. Here, let's listen, play the clip.
With Copilot. Copilot is really the new Microsoft Clippy. I don't know if you remember that, Bob, but it was not a huge success.
Now, George, Nadella responded that traditional SaaS apps are going to be subsumed by agents, basically implying that firms like Salesforce are going to become less relevant in the future as agents are going to act as chefs, if you will, composing outcomes from data using AI. So, George, set up the next clip.
Okay, so let's listen to Nadella saying agents will fully replace SaaS apps. This is on the Gurley Gerster podcast. It was, I think, a couple months ago. And he very explicitly says agents will talk to SaaS databases directly through their schemas, not through their APIs, meaning this is just through the persistent store, not the application programming interface through which you update the databases normally. So let's play that clip and listen in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very, very important question. The SaaS applications or biz apps, so let me just speak of our own dynamics thing.
Right.
The approach at least we're taking is, I think the notion that business applications exist, that's probably where they'll all collapse, right, in the agent era. Because if you think about it, right, they are essentially CRUD databases with a bunch of business logic. The business logic is all going to these agents. And these agents are going to be multi-repo CRUD, right? So they're not going to discriminate between what the backend is. They're going to update multiple databases and all the logic will be in the AI tier, so to speak. And once the AI tier becomes the place where all the logic is, then people will start replacing the backends, right? People
and this time around, the thing about agents is they are not going to be bound to essentially any one SaaS application and its data, right? So I'll have an agentic sort of view where the task, the intent, and I will go operate and orchestrate all the logic across multiple SaaS applications, right? I'll go call a bunch of APIs through tools use. So I'll call a bunch of APIs. I will, in fact, I'll post-train my model to know about multiple SaaS applications. in the agent tier. And so that's what's going to happen. So I think what will happen is these SaaS applications are a CRUD database with a lot of business logic. So
the war of words really underscores different philosophies. And when you get beyond the public trolling, you find that there are bits of truth in what each CEO is saying. But some parts are missing, some major pieces, frankly, that we're going to discuss today. So there's a fundamental transformation underway, and it's going to be a long journey. So our feeling is that enterprise technology stands on the brink of this profound shift. So we set this up. We got rigid, linear value chains, George, and you've put forth this notion of end-to-end dynamic platforms. They're orchestrating this network of activities. You've mentioned many times, George, you've sort of used the analogy of Amazon, not AWS, but Amazon retail, as a foundational platform, building these digital twins. So I'd like you to sort of dig into that a little bit and share with us. We've got this slide here from Web 2.0 to Enterprise 3.0. Explain the slide and then elaborate.
Okay, so on the left side, you've got this traditional source, make, deliver value chain view of how enterprises work. And that was really embodied in the ERP, CRM era of enterprise applications. There was an enterprise worked by adding value in sort of a sequence of steps, and it was very much kind of like a mechanical device. And then we saw the rise in the last 20, 25 years of the consumer online platforms that were just matching a consumer and a resource. But Amazon was the first one to take that and go beyond just simple matching. And they built an incredibly sophisticated operational capability where there's a whole network of activities that data and AI can orchestrate. And the key point is that for 50 years, applications really have treated data as a corporate asset. But the processes were sort of entangled or embalmed in the procedural code. And so applications were not that flexible. If you need to move to a platform world, you need to treat the processes in addition to the data as assets so that the processes can be reconfigured and the platform can be much more dynamic in how it takes shape. You can apply analytics to processes in addition to data. That's the big change.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're seeing this bifurcation of the enterprise software business. You got this, we're calling a new fault line is emerging. So on this slide, George, you got enterprise software is splitting into two categories. The first one is learning from data about the business or build infrastructure. You've got this side of James Bond, no time to die. You got above the ice and below the ice. I think your premise here is that the value is migrating above the ice, this abstraction layer. The example I use is with you when we were prepping for this is some kind of like virtualization. It's sort of commoditized the physical hardware and the value capture migrated north. And you just sort of talked about Amazon retail, but I wonder if you could explain the sort of analogy of this slide and that above the ice, below the ice concept.
Okay, so let me try and elaborate. You could say that with the rise of these large language models as coding agents and with the tremendous productivity benefits to software developers we're seeing and other capabilities that are basically turning algorithmic software development by corporate developers into, I guess you could say, we're seeing the beginning of the commoditization of that activity, whether it's low-code tools or generative AI software development tools. The new place of the new location of value add is where you're shaping some structure that's like a digital twin that learns about the operations of your business from data about the operations of your business. You're trying to fashion a 4D map. The technical implementation is a knowledge graph, but that's not the important part. The important part is that you're learning about the business, things that were too hard to encode in rules algorithmically. Now you learn about them, and then that's one side of the industry, the people providing the tools and the sort of industry applications that have learned. And then the other part of the industry, which is below the ice, that's downward looking. They're looking at hardware. They're talking about strings, not things. That's the bifurcation we're talking about.
And that fourth dimension is time, correct?
Yes, because it's dynamic. The Palantir folks do a great job of explaining this, that we need to capture the kinetics and dynamics of the business, the physics, because for too long we've treated it as a just mechanical device that was sort of frozen, and we optimized it for efficiency. Now we need to sort of be able to orchestrate it for effectiveness, to learn. It's something that's intelligent and emergent. It's not Newtonian, mechanical, and efficient.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's examine what this next era of enterprise platforms is going to look like. In our view, the future of enterprise software is going to enable organizations to build a real-time digital representation of their enterprise. This is something we started to talk about quite some time ago, a couple of years ago, actually, with the 6 data platform. So this idea of an end-to-end digital twin, it's an organic system. We're showing this chart here, which is you've got your platforms, which have largely been stovepiped. We've shown a version of this slide before where increasingly you're getting more managed services, vendor management as you go up the stack, as you go from left to right with SaaS, and that of course it contains a lot of business logic, a lot of process logic. But the idea here, George, and I'd love for you to take us through this slide. You've got this abstraction layer above it. It's this harmonized source of truth. You've got agents on top of them. We've called them in the past worker bee agents. They can collaborate together, but they're not stovepiped. They're collaborative. They do their job really well, but they've got access to tools to do their jobs and the ability to interact with other agents. They can take top-down direction based on corporate metrics, et cetera. Explain how you see this future laying out and what the dimensions are of this graphic.
Okay, so let's tie this back to what Nadella and Benioff were talking about, which is everyone's really excited about agents right now. And the joke I use is it's like that scene in the Pixar movie Up when the dogs are chasing down, I forgot exactly who it was, and you yell squirrel and the dogs go crazy. Now we yell agent and everyone goes crazy. But agents are just like machine tools. These machine tools have to be put on an assembly line for there to be real process innovation. Right now, there are these standalone devices, and just the way 15 years ago we had mobile and social and cloud coming together to create the pipeline, the transformation. Agents themselves aren't going to transform enterprise software. The agents have to work with a harmonized source of truth, this 4D map that gives them a shared ability to perceive the entire state of the business. That's what has to happen. Now, to be fair, for decades, there's been a dream of let's build one enterprise model so we can see from end to end what's going on, and that's never happened. What's different this time is that agents are good at learning something, and then if a human supervisor decides that needs to be repeatable, that needs to be not a one-off thing that's just implicit to the agent's tacit knowledge, they can have the agent spit out some code that adds to this digital twin. So that's how these agents will work together with humans to build out the twin with some top-down governance. That's how I think this is going to unfold.
So I want to stress that this is an organic system. It's iterative, and it's represented by an agentic model that evolves over time. It's not built strictly based on top-down or bottom-up guardrails, if you will. And in our view, there's a competitive imperative that businesses are going to have to do this businesses are going to have to unify their data in order to accomplish this. And these stovepipe application estates are going to have to come together, and if they hope to match the agility of what George has set up as the example he showed before of Amazon, or George, you've used the example of Instacart in the past. So you've got agentic UIs, you've got workflows, they're guided by human oversight, and they're going to progressively capture knowledge. So they're building blocks within this digital twin. They're a trusted source of truth. And it's interesting when you and I were prepping for this, thinking about the battle between Benioff and Nadella. There's traditional infrastructure underneath that's going to remain. Your premise is that, Benioff dismissing Microsoft's approach as just Clippy, and Nadella saying that SaaS layers are going to vanish. There's grains of truth in each of those, is what your premise is. From Microsoft's standpoint, there needs to be a new interface. You've got natural language processing driving human interaction and reasoning, and these dynamic agents. And then the flip side of that is you've got to have access to the business processes. And that's really what Benioff is trying to orchestrate.
And yes, before we transition and start explaining the road to get there, the reason you need this harmonized view of business processes is you have to be able to answer 4 questions, both the humans and the agents, either individually or in collaboration. They have to be able to answer what happened, why, what's likely to happen, and what should we do. And right now, you can mostly answer questions about what happened, and by counting things in a data lake or a data warehouse. And if you want to ask what's likely to happen with a heavy amount of data engineering and data science, you can get a telescopic view, a narrow perspective. But to be able to look across the enterprise and out into your ecosystem environment, you need that harmonized asset. That's that key piece of foundational software. And again, the agents help you build that piece by piece.
Right, to get to that next best action with confidence. All right, let's get into the journey of how this all plays out. Here's a graphic of an automation map from some Insight partners. As you can see, the picture is highly fragmented. And while George, as he pointed out, everybody's rushing to adopt agents, squirrel. Most simply aren't deploying them the way we're envisioning. They're all sort of within application silos. So this is kind of a 1.0, if you will. And, there's incremental benefits, but it's not a huge game changer, George, right? And so it's like, here's my question. You look at this chart, it's really fragmented. Is it going to be like the security business where we're going to have a perpetual mess on our hands? So how can businesses chart a path forward with all this complexity? What say you?
I think we're going to see, like we saw a year ago, a ton of RAG pilots for Gen AI. People are like, Gen AI is hot. I got to do something with Gen AI. Let me do a RAG pilot because, I can't just use ChatGPT. And there wasn't that much value to it. I think we'll find pockets of value in individual or functional agents. There will be value, but you won't have the breakthrough of the equivalent of Ford's assembly line until we harness them into a broader orchestration environment where we can align their activities. We can use analytics to say, here are our corporate goals. Each agent might have task or process specific goals, but you have to align them all together. So we'll see a lot of functional or silo specific agent activity, but I think in the background, you're going to see a huge amount of activity in trying to harmonize not just the data, but the process definitions that go with it. In other words, you're going to see more and more activity trying to harmonize the data and application estate as people realize that's where the real foundational value is.
Yeah, and our view is that these agents are essentially machine tools, I think is the phrase you use of the modern enterprise. But to realize their full potential, companies got to build the equivalent of an assembly line, which means they got to think about re-engineering their processes. Not oftentimes we talk about paving the cow path. David Floyer is big on this. We've got to re-engineer, rethink the processes that every disruptive technology ultimately is going to require, and that's how genuine transformation occurs. So what we'd like to do now let's dig into Microsoft. Let's dig into Salesforce. So start with Microsoft's approach. The work that George has done shows that while Microsoft has achieved, decent strides in agentic UIs and productivity tools, which has been their focus, it hasn't delivered this end-to-end integration that we've been talking about. So George, Nadella's vision of agents bypassing traditional SaaS applications, speaks to a future. He used the term, just CRUD databases, which just stands for create, read, update, and delete, that sit below an agentic layer. But you have shared with me that without that harmonization across multiple applications, that's not going to cut it. They don't have that unified view. So explain this chart and shed some light on how this gap might be filled and whether Microsoft, in your view, can evolve to meet that challenge.
Okay, so part of the issue was that Microsoft, when they started building their agentic UI and tools, they were severely constrained on GPUs, partly because ChatGPT had taken off, and partly because they were surprised by the uptake. And so they had to choose in order of the businesses, Bing, Office, or Azure. They did Bing, as Dave, you and I have talked about before. They did Bing to draw Google into putting Gen AI in search because that would destroy the profitability. And then they did Office, and I'm not 100% sure why they did Office first, but the way the harmonized business process model that Microsoft has to apply to support agents, theirs is the Microsoft graph, and it's productivity and collaboration centric. It's not business process centric. And their 365 Copilot is taking a long time to mature because the use cases are not yet there. They made one big mistake. Also, they put the graph and connectors to work out of the box with Microsoft, essentially Microsoft-only apps. And if you have third-party apps, you need to go to a partner, and that's a seven-figure, customization deal. Glean did a better job of this. Glean is building something very similar, but they went for multi-vendor out of the box. Now, where I put on this slide a white box, this is empty because Microsoft didn't do anything like the Microsoft Graph to harmonize business processes. And so right now, it's hard to take their Power Platform agent building tools and work across applications, even though they're working against external application APIs through their connectors, not the CRUD databases. But it's when you work with today's technology through a bunch of connectors, in their case, 1,400 connectors, each connector speaks a different language. And so the agents can't make coherent sense out of the business, the state of the business. In other words, they can't perceive the environment very easily. That's the problem. That's where they're missing the harmonized business process model.
And George, I presume they chose to go after Office first because that's their heritage. Focusing on Azure would have been probably more AWS-like, and that's not necessarily, their strong suit, although Azure's doing well. Plus, from a marketing standpoint, they got a lot of, they were able to make a lot of noise around Office, and it touched, a lot of users. So I presume are you saying you feel like that's a mistake, or you're saying that's a circuitous path to transforming enterprise software?
I think there will ultimately need to be a Copilot UI to agents for two reasons. One, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of agents in an organization, and they need a coherent place to interact with each user. That'll be the Copilot front end. But there's something else that will be valuable that'll be derived from their Microsoft Graph, which is the productivity and collaboration oriented platform, which is all the interaction between people that is part of a business process that enterprise applications can't capture, will be captured in that environment. And you will need that when you want to essentially orchestrate the activity of people and agents across the enterprise. In other words, that will be important. It's just taking a long time to mature. And I think the easier thing to do would have been the back-end business processes.
Okay, now let's just oppose that against the Salesforce approach, which we'll dig into now. We our view, Salesforce, look, they're making significant strides, not just marketing, but in agent-based data and application pipelines with their data cloud, with what they're doing with MuleSoft, with the integration of other parts of their business like Tableau, to really automate. Benioff says that we're basically, building the new world of enterprise software. We're building, we're delivering digital workers. So it's a completely different way to look at software. And, the new data cloud, some people call it the semantic layer, point toward a future where agents are going to be able to collaborate easily, I don't want to say seamlessly, but easily across customer activities and driven by metrics. But George, the question is, can Salesforce extend beyond its core CRM roots to become what you've said would be a software hyperscaler platform, I think is how you put it to me last night, where you're pulling in data and processes from all parts of the enterprise, not just the CRM, their domain. Can you dive into Salesforce's approach, whether you think it's, which by the way is built on traditional relational underpinnings, JSON objects, etc. And can this evolve into what you're describing as this full-fledged digital twin?
Okay, I think the short answer is yes. And you did distill what I think their strategy is, which is to be essentially the application development layer for intelligent data applications on AWS. In other words, AWS has great hardware, and I think what Salesforce is trying to do is transform from an application company to an application platform and tools company that happens to have applications as building blocks. And the way they're doing it is they've got a data cloud that provides the customer semantics that you and I have been talking about for a couple of years now, Dave. It's a customer profile, but not just attributes about the customer, but the customer journey. That's the process by which the customer has been engaging with an organization. And the data doesn't have to just live in Salesforce. All this metadata that describes it lives in the Salesforce data cloud, and it can in real time pull data from Databricks or Snowflake or Redshift or wherever, or other applications. And it's truly that it's because they're trying to position it as a semantic layer above those other systems that can also, store data and cache it, if necessary. And they're trying to make it so easy to work with the customer data. And then you can do the analytics on it, and you can operationalize a decision automatically into the Customer 360 apps from Salesforce or other apps via MuleSoft. Just a quick metric on their success. It looks like Data Cloud from their earnings yesterday is on a $750 million run rate. And I think MuleSoft, is in the $500 million to $1 billion range, somewhere in there. And the reason I put them together is MuleSoft is like the data pipeline business that is like a third of Snowflake's business and maybe something like a half of Databricks' business. In other words, pipelines and data platforms go together. And so the data cloud is already a big business. And I think over time, we'll see it like we saw the cloud emerge from Microsoft. People saw Microsoft as, a stable, mature office productivity business and a stable, mature server software business. But then Azure became the high growth platform within that overall business. And I think we're going to see the same thing between data cloud and agents.
Yeah, that's a meaningful business, headed toward $1 billion. All right, let's talk about the future state. So we've laid out and have been for now a couple of years this ultimate goal of a unified network, you've got agents across departments and business functions, and you don't have these siloed bots. That again is enabled in part by this harmonized data model. And our premise is that harmonized business model, including business logic and apps and analytics, it's going to combine with human oversight so that rules can adapt. We've talked before about agents learning from reasoning traces of humans when there's been exceptions. So this all has to take place, again, in an organic fashion, not hard-coded. And we've talked about Salesforce. We've many times talked about Palantir and relational AI and Celonis. We'll bring those back in. But we've got relational data models. We're moving to process mining, knowledge-based graphs and digital twins. And as we're showing here, the long-term goal, George, is this agent-to-human collaboration, which is aligned with this digital business model. And of course, it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. But walk us through the state of the future that you see, that maybe this collision course that these two companies are on, whether we'll see one approach dominate or an ongoing evolution of sort of parallel competing visions. What's your take on that?
So to be fair, like right now, Salesforce has more of the pieces. Microsoft has some amazing low-code development tools for applications and agent building applications in the Power Platform. These are very mature, but what they don't have yet, and what Salesforce does have, is an ability to start building out this digital business model. In other words, like I was saying in the beginning, where we're seeing the beginning of the end of hand-coded algorithmic software in corporations, here, when an agent learns about a process that you want to make repeatable, you have the agent write the component that adds to the digital twin. That's that organic, emergent, a construction of the twin. There has to be governance so it's coherent, some top-down guidance. But then at the same time, like today, most business intelligence metrics, the analytics are hard-coded and embedded in the dashboards, but we want the metrics and all the relationships between the metrics to be also in the data platform. This is a model of what drives your business. What type of engagement with a customer leads to a conversion, and then how many campaigns do you need of what type, and how to drive how many conversions to achieve your revenue growth targets. And then the agents are learning both from their human supervision and from how they interact with those metrics. And that's how this whole system evolves. That's the key thing. We're talking about this is a management system. There's a lot of pieces in it, and vendors will want to tell you that their pieces are really good. And someday we may have interoperability good enough to make the pieces easy to fit together. But I think for most mainstream enterprises, getting the components from one vendor so that they fit together will make it easier to build this overall system. And right now, that's where Salesforce is leading.
Yeah, and it's the age-old debate between, bespoke tools, best of breed, roll your own versus an integrated system. Well, we're coming to the end of our episode here, George, but I want to summarize this transition. To reiterate, we're saying that enterprise applications are on the brink of a radical transformation. They're moving from this rigid linear value chains, that earlier chart that we showed, to end-to-end platforms that orchestrate networks of activities, that Amazon.com example. And the research that George has done and the data that we've analyzed suggests that digital twins, which are going to be powered by knowledge graphs, are going to finally, this is the promise our industry is making, that's going to finally liberate business processes from the static sort of confines that were today they're locked into application code. And then you've got this flexible, fungible building blocks. And this is foundational technology. It's going to pave the way for reshaping how organizations operate and it's going to drive massive productivity. That's the promise that our industry is putting forth. George, maybe you could summarize the battle between these software titans and your thoughts on the enterprise transition, and explain again this, Amazon for all concept. You sort of just alluded to it. You're saying the best path is to go with an integrated platform, but give us a sense of how long this is going to take to play out.
So this is probably a 5 to 10 year transition, and for those who think this is science fiction, I would only say, look at how many companies Amazon itself has steamrolled over, because they built not an application to start with like selling books and media, but they built a platform for e-commerce and fulfillment activity. And over time, they've engineered this so that, again, the business processes, not just the data that count things, the processes themselves are business assets, and that allows them to be reconfigured and composed and applied to new businesses. That's what's going to be the accelerant, that tech-centric companies come in and compete with, mainstream companies who have not essentially re-engineered and harmonized their operations. Now, Microsoft's not going away just because Salesforce might have the leg up on building the customer-centric processes right now. Both of them could get more business process context that's harmonized from Celonis, which mines it from the activity logs, process mining from the activity logs of traditional enterprise apps. And both could get far more configurable and customizable and easy to develop business processes from someone like relational AI, where the business process definitions are just like the data, so that, again, analytics can manipulate the processes as easily as it can manipulate the data. And, we're seeing round one of the rock'em sock'em bout between Salesforce and Microsoft.
Yeah, and you and I talked about this. I mentioned David Michela years ago, said the internet giants, they have a dual disruption agenda. Not only are they disrupting IT, but they're also disrupting other industries. And, you think about Amazon, bookseller to e-commerce, Dynamo, they're a media titan. They're an advertising platform. They're a grocer. They've got, healthcare. They're a satellite operator. Of course, they're a provider of world-class IT infrastructure, on and on and on. And the reason is largely because they've put data at the core of their business. They're able to traverse industries, which normally the entire value chain of an industry, the linear value chain that you've been talking about, you're stuck in that value chain. You've got expertise and knowledge and data and skills that cannot traverse that don't apply across industries. Amazon has proven that that's not the case, as have some other internet giants. All right, let's wrap it off here. We've talked about this shift from linear value chains to holistic platforms. This is a fundamental change in how we think companies are going to organize and manage themselves and evolve. And then you've got these new application models emerging where, again, processes aren't hardwired, hard-coded. Even when you think about microservices, they're hard-coded. This is a new model for organizational constructs and how processes are developed and evolved over time. This idea of digital representation of an enterprise, knowledge graphs, we think, are a key enabler here. And that's why we've cited potential partners on the previous slide, like Celonis, like relational AI, because they allow for the introduction of these orchestration capabilities that can turn processes into assets that can be reused as building blocks. And previously we had these cemented or fossilized processes that now become much more facile and what we're saying are malleable and fungible instead of sort of static code. And then, when we look forward, we just see this enabling new types of networks and network effects to be created, driving productivity. That is, again, the promise of our industry. And George, why don't you give us the final word and bring us home?
I think that we're living in an age where, each generation of technology has sort of bigger blast radius, and we're in a transition that's going to have a very large blast radius, because the last time with the rise of the consumer online giants, it was limited to a half dozen consumer tech companies that became among the largest companies in the world. But we're going to see the technology that enabled that type of industrial organization come to every sector. Now, the question is, will it be mainstream companies that can get their houses in order in time, or will tech-centric companies grow up and sort of either marginalize them or perform the equivalent of a cashectomy and take out, the most profitable activities? And as you were saying, since they can orchestrate assets and people just via data, they can be asset light organizations, and they don't have to have physical ownership of the assets, legal ownership, or employment of all the people. So there's a real profound question coming as to who's gonna capture the value add of this next generation that's gonna have a very big blast radius.
All right, George, as always, great work. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for putting together these slides, and well done. We'll keep this train rolling. All right. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks to Alex Meyerson and Ken Schiffman, who's not here today, but he's on production. Both of them they both do our podcast. Kristen Martin and Cheryl Knight help get the word out on social media and in our newsletters, and Rob Hof is our EIC over at SiliconANGLE.com. Remember, all these episodes, they're available as podcasts. Wherever you listen, just search Breaking Analysis Podcast. I publish each week on thecuberesearch.com and SiliconANGLE.com. You can email me if you got a pitch or you got some ideas, you want to be on the program. Email me at david.vellante@siliconangle.com or DM me at dvellante. Comment on our LinkedIn post, and definitely check out etr.ai. We didn't use any of their data today, but they've got the best survey data in the enterprise tech business. This is Dave Vellante for George Gilbert and theCUBE Research Insights, powered by ETR. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Breaking Analysis.